They adjusted plans around my flexibility. Not because I asked them to, because they learned they could. At first it felt harmless, even flattering. I was the one who could shift things around, the one who didn't make a fuss. If something changed last minute, I adapted. If someone needed more time, I gave it. If priorities moved, mine moved too. I told myself it was maturity, emotional intelligence, the ability to stay fluid while others stayed rigid. Flexibility became my defining trait. People described me that way, without hesitation. Reliable because I was adaptable. Easy because I didn't resist. Supportive because I didn't push back. It sounded positive. It felt useful. And for a while it worked. What I didn't notice was how quickly flexibility stopped being appreciated and started being assumed. Plans weren't discussed with me anymore. They were adjusted for me. Decisions were made with the quiet confidence that I'd rearrange myself around them. My time became something others edited freely, like it belonged to the group instead of to me. I rarely said no, not because I couldn't, but because saying yes felt smoother. Less friction. Less explanation. I avoided conflict by bending first. And every time I did, the expectation grew a little stronger. Not in words, in behavior, in how little warning I was given, in how casually my availability was treated. There was a pattern forming, even if no one named it. If something was inconvenient, I absorbed it. If something needed adjusting, I adjusted. If someone was late, I waited. If something changed suddenly, I adapted. My flexibility wasn't just helpful anymore. It was structural. I started noticing it in small moments. How people seemed surprised when I hesitated. How explanations were offered only after decisions had already been made. How my agreement was presumed, not requested. I could feel the shift, but I didn't interrupt it. Interrupting would mean asserting something I wasn't sure I was allowed to assert. The truth is, flexibility feels safe when you're afraid of being difficult. It keeps you included. It keeps you needed. It keeps you from becoming the problem. So I kept adapting, even as it began to cost more than it gave back. I told myself this was temporary, that once things settled, once people noticed how much I was accommodating, it would balance out. But balance never arrived. Only more adjustments, more last-minute changes, more quiet assumptions that I would make it work.
And I did.
Until one day, I realized I was exhausted by how available I had made myself. Not physically, emotionally. The constant readiness, the low-level vigilance, the sense that my time was always provisional. That was the first moment I wondered whether flexibility, when expected, stopped being a strength and started becoming a liability. I didn't change anything yet. I just noticed. And once you notice something like that, it changes how every interaction feels. The fatigue didn't show up all at once. It crept in through repetition, through the feeling of being on standby even when nothing was scheduled. I realized I was no longer choosing flexibility. I was maintaining it to avoid discomfort. Every adjustment required a small internal negotiation. Do I push back or let it slide? Do I clarify or accommodate? Almost every time, I chose the path that asked less of others and more of me. It kept things smooth on the surface, but underneath, something was tightening. I started to feel a quiet resentment I didn't want to admit. Not because people were malicious. Most of them weren't. But because my availability had become part of their planning logic. They counted on it. And counting on something tends to erase gratitude. What struck me most was how little my absence was ever considered. No one asked what would happen if I wasn't flexible. They didn't need to. I had never given them a reason to imagine that scenario. That realization sat with me longer than I expected. I replayed conversations in my head. Not for what was said, but for what was assumed. How often my schedule was treated like an open field. How rarely anyone checked whether I was okay with the changes they made. I felt complicit. Not because I was weak, but because I had trained people to expect this version of me. I had made flexibility so reliable that it looked permanent. The internal conflict sharpened. Part of me wanted to explain myself, to announce boundaries, to clarify expectations. But another part resisted that idea completely. Why did my unavailability need justification when my availability never had? That question stayed with me. I tested something small. I delayed a response. Not to punish, just to see what happened. The reaction was immediate. Follow-ups. Assumptions that I must have missed something. A subtle anxiety that appeared the moment I wasn't instantly reachable. That response told me everything. My flexibility wasn't just convenient. It had become necessary for the system as it existed. Removing it, even slightly, created discomfort. And discomfort revealed dependence. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't accuse. I just observed. And with every observation, my decision grew quieter and firmer. I didn't want to explain myself anymore. Explanations invite negotiation. Negotiation turns boundaries into debates. I wasn't ready for confrontation, but I was ready for absence. Not dramatic absence. Not disappearing. Just not being as available as I used to be. That decision didn't feel empowering at first. It felt unsettling, like stepping out of a role without knowing who you are without it. I wondered who I would be if I wasn't the adaptable one, if I wasn't the solution. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living in permanent adjustment mode. The change was quiet enough that no one noticed immediately. That was intentional. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I simply stopped rearranging myself to fit everyone else's expectations. I let messages wait. I declined adjustments without over-justifying. I stopped preemptively offering solutions when plans shifted. And with every small act of unavailability, the dynamic strained. People reacted in different ways. Some seemed confused, as if a tool they relied on wasn't working properly anymore. Others grew impatient. A few became openly irritated. It was strange to watch how quickly flexibility, once withdrawn, was reclassified as obligation unfulfilled. That's when I saw it clearly. My adaptability had been interpreted as a service, not a choice. And by becoming unavailable without explanation, I disrupted that assumption. The pressure increased subtly. Hints that I was being difficult. Jokes about how busy I suddenly was. A tone that suggested I owed consistency, as if my availability had been promised indefinitely. I didn't correct them. Silence did the work for me. Without explanations to push against, people were forced to sit with their reactions. Some adjusted. Some didn't. But the burden of managing their expectations was no longer mine. The power shift wasn't loud. It didn't look like control. It looked like neutrality. I was no longer overextending to preserve comfort. And without that buffer, the imbalance became visible. What surprised me most was how much space appeared in my own life. Time felt different. Not fuller. Calmer. I wasn't constantly anticipating changes. I wasn't mentally rehearsing accommodations. I was present in a way I hadn't been before. Of course, not everyone liked this version of me. Some relationships weakened. A few cooled significantly. They had been built around access, not connection. And without unlimited access, they lost momentum. That used to scare me. Now it felt clarifying. I didn't gain dominance. I gained dignity. I stopped explaining myself into exhaustion. I stopped proving my flexibility as a form of worth. And in doing so, I learned that availability is not neutral currency. It shapes power, expectations, and respect. By stepping back quietly, I allowed people to experience what it was like when I wasn't endlessly adjustable. And that experience told me everything I needed to know about how I had been valued. The ending wasn't clean. There was no moment where everything resolved neatly. Some connections adapted. Others faded. A few never recovered. But the clarity I gained stayed. Flexibility, I learned, is only a strength when it's voluntary. The moment it becomes expected, it stops being generosity and starts becoming extraction. People don't always mean to take advantage. Often, they just adapt to what's available. By becoming unavailable without explaining, I reclaimed something fundamental. Control over my time. Over my energy. Over the version of myself I offered to others. I still adapt when I choose to, but I no longer disappear to make things easier. I no longer treat my availability as a default setting. And I no longer feel guilty for not being endlessly flexible. The most important change wasn't external. It was internal. I stopped measuring my value by how much I could accommodate. I stopped equating ease with worth. I allowed discomfort to exist without rushing to fix it. If you've ever been the flexible one, the adaptable one, the person everyone adjusts around without asking, you know how quietly that role can consume you. The question isn't whether flexibility is good or bad. It's whether it's still yours.